Another important day in the history of Florida State University and Florida State athletics. Florida State has agreed to, and the Board of Trustees for Florida State has approved to move forward with the settlement with the Atlantic Coast Conference. Clemson did the same. The Atlantic Coast Conference itself did the same. The litigation ends today. Ladies and gentlemen, we got him. That's what we're going to be talking about here on Warchant TV. He's Gene Williams, founder and administrator of Warchant.com. My name is Tom Lang. And the board meeting, it lasted just as Ira Schafel, our managing editor, predicted, Gene. They were going to sit in a closed session for a half an hour or an hour, and it was going to be mostly a procedural meeting today, not as much bombast as there was on several of these open meetings and virtual meetings over the last year and a half. And now Florida State says no mas to litigation, and the deal that they got is better than we thought it was less than one day ago. What say you, sir, on this important day for Florida State?
Yeah, we taped the video 24 hours ago, and we were kind of like, this is a win. I thought that everything was great. The initial reports from Pete Thamel to ESPN and Andy Staples at On 3, and it seemed really good. So I frankly was surprised. I've spent the last probably 24 hours discussing, debating with a lot of folks who thought, well, you know, the door's open for Florida State to get out in the next couple of years. And I said, well, hold your horses. I think this is structured in a way where there's going to be a lot of incentives to wait to 2030. You know, that contract is up with the Big Ten. We know in 2030 as well, it's all lining up for that. Man, when these numbers came out, it is surprising. And again, if you're not familiar, there's reports on Warchant. You can read all about it a little bit. But, you know, what we have now, and we're hopeful to get a full contract. But again, you know how the ACC likes to hide contracts.
Yeah.
So we'll see if we can get a hold of more specifics. But what is being reported is the penalty FSU's got to play this year. They're not leaving 2025. But you could theoretically leave the following season. The penalty, everything. This is not just, you know, I know there was a separation of the GOR and the penalty for leaving. It's $165 million flat. That's it. You're out. And then even better, which I'm even surprised that they structured it this way, it drops $18 million every year until you hit that 2030 mark. And then what is it, like $75 million, Tom? Is
Yes.
that 2030 mark? So, I mean, there is, again, it's going to be all about the math. And it's going to be about what the other, let's just say Big Ten for now, SEC may jump in at some point. You know, what are they going to be willing to give you if you get in there before 2030 in terms of your share? That is a key thing. If they want to bring you in right away with a full share, and I think people, why wouldn't we? We're Florida State. Well, it's very complicated when you've got Fox and these other TV partners. It's something like $7 billion. It's CBS. It's NBC. It's not that easy to jump in and mix things up. And they may insist that some of these other schools take a cut. They're not going to want to do that. I'm not saying it's impossible. And I think now the door is actually open for Florida State to potentially leave before 2030. But this opens up a whole world of possibilities on what Florida State can do over the next few years, especially if they can go out and start winning at a high level again, Tom. What would that do? Maybe you make the playoffs the next couple seasons. Suddenly, Big Ten's going, you know what? Maybe we get you close to a full share. Get in here a little early.
I think what we can say now, Gene, is most certainly what ESPN put out on Monday when they reported that, in 2030, that there's going to be a penalty just a little bit less than $100 million, and the share could be upwards of $15 million more per school on these brand initiatives. That was an early spin job because $75 million is not $100 million.
No.
Because Ira's heard that it's $18 million that you could make per school per year in the brand initiative, not $15 million.
I've heard 15 to 20. It's going to, again, we're not going to know every year. It's going to vary, but yeah, it's in a really nice range. I think 15 is the baseline, and that's not even the performance incentives.
Right.
I mean, if we talked about getting back to wins and losses, Tom, if you're consistently getting in that ACC championship, getting to playoffs, now you're over 20 million a year. And again, it's not going to be as much as Georgia or Florida's getting, but you're within the ballpark where you're able to compete. And now you have these other now you have advantages over your in-conference competition where you're getting more money than BC, you're getting more money than NC State. So in theory, more resources, if they're used effectively, should give you a decided advantage on the field. But you have to get the good players. You have to be coached up correctly. That hasn't always happened at Florida State, but you're given the tools now that you should be a superior program.
Yeah, again, so if I am a lifer for the ACC, I love this conference the way that SEC fans cheer SEC when another school wins a championship. Yesterday, I heard from Pete Thamel that it's going to be a little less than $100 million to leave, and it's in 2030. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, so maybe it's like $90 million, and there wouldn't be a way that somebody could exit before 2030. That would be like a light switch flipping on, and this is the moment that you can leave. But certainly they would have locked all of these institutions in there between now and then. Then Andy Staples comes out with a report from On3 around 2 o'clock yesterday, and if I'm that ACC flag-waving person, I see, oh, God, they could leave for $200 million right now? Well, that's troubling. I don't really like I thought we had much more leverage in this ironclad agreement was going to keep us all locked in together until 2036. Then you get to today, and you realize it's not $200 million at all. It's $165 million right now. This second, if Florida State wanted to leave, it's $165 million, and it decreases evenly by $18 million every single year until in 2030, it's not 100, it's not 90, it's $75 million. Gene, it seems like as this has gone on for the last 18, 24 hours, the details of the deal keep getting better and better and better for Florida State and worse and worse and worse for those who were hoping in the triangle that this whole thing was going to hold together, and those who scoffed at Florida State for being brave enough to talk about how much they were worth.
Yeah, especially when you go back and look at what the valuation was on those rights just, a few weeks ago. FSU's paying $500 million conservatively or more to get out. And that's even, the ACC has the option. They didn't have to give you those rights. They could say, you know what? No, we don't want your $500 million. We're going to keep them and screw you. You're not going to be able to go anywhere to 2036. So from going from $500 million plus to 165, that's why I scoff at some of these columnists. They'll go like, well, Florida State lost this thing and they capitulated. I think one of them, a former Gator, I don't want to mention his name, said FSU bended the knee to the ACC. Well, I will take a, $350 million bend the knee if that's what it takes. And that's effective what they got, which improves every year. As you said, 18 million less every season. It's exciting, Tom. You're right. The immediate now for Florida State is completely focus on getting the wins. You've got a good, strong brand. Improve that brand the next couple of years, so you're going to look really good in the eyes of one of those Power 2 conferences, because that's where this is headed. And maybe you get out a little earlier.
Yep.
Maybe one of them want to get there. Maybe I think I've heard rumblings that there are a couple pretty financially lucrative boosters that might be willing to fit all or most of that bill for the exit fee.
Whoa.
If that's the case, then it comes down to how much of that share can you get? I still, at some point those numbers are going to work, especially when those at 18 million keeps dropping each year. Somebody's going to run the numbers and say, you know what, it's going to work. Let's do it now. Let's put in our notice and prepare. A year from now, we're in the Big Ten, we're in the SEC, and that's when it's going to get really exciting.
Yeah, and that's the thing to circle back to again, because yesterday it seemed like it was at 2029, 2030 that would be the time that Florida State would exit, full stop. There was no sliding scale discussion. We discussed that a little bit on the Monday Smash here on Warchant TV. And if you've got thoughts on this, make sure in the comments section to say, this is better than I thought, or you guys are still crazy. They need to be out yesterday. Feel free. Let us know. We enjoy the feedback here on Warchant TV. But Gene, yes, this is a constant cost-benefit analysis going on for Florida State, the Board of Trustees, the president, everybody that's involved here between now and the year 2030. Because maybe it's a little bit more expensive or a little bit more costly to be in a Power 2 conference for an interim period of 2 seasons. Maybe you earn 10 million less or 15 million less. But then you graduate up the ranks and it becomes either net neutral to your ACC deal or positive from the ACC deal in the interim. Isn't it worth it to have more spots in the playoff? Isn't it worth it to Florida State to have the prestige of playing in Power 2 football from a recruiting standpoint for football? Isn't it worth it because it galvanizes boosters and season ticket sales and brand power in those regards? That's the discussion that Florida State has now. Chair Collins said it today. We were told we don't have any options. Now we have options. Florida State actually has a little bit of leverage if they want to go talk to the Power 2 about how about 2 years from now? How about 3 years from now? What can you do for me in 2030 or what can you do for me in 2031? You can actually have those conversations, and they are appropriate conversations to have because Florida State, again, is looking at the numbers, and the numbers aren't nearly as expensive as they were just 2 days ago.
No, and I think you nailed it there when you talked about some of the other factors that will go into this. It's not just, and I said it's about the numbers, it is, but it's also, there is some other intrinsic benefits about being in one of those Power 2 conferences. I don't have to tell FSU fans. They were all here for the snub. They've seen what's happened to primetime television on ESPN, how FSU's been relegated to a second-tier citizen. And you hear the Paul Feinbaums and all these other people they put up on a pedestal that put Florida State down constantly. So there is definitely a benefit. And there's also maybe you get better officiating, I would hope. Something I know that's near and dear to Florida State fans' hearts everywhere. So there is a number beyond that. So I don't think it's the break-even point. It's like how much you're willing to pay to get out of the ACC to get into one of these high-profile conferences and solidify yourself in there. And I think it's a good point, Tom. The schedule, especially if it ends up being the SEC, I think that schedule is going to improve. You're going to get better ticket sales. You're going to get more people coming. It'll be more beneficial for Tallahassee, I think, more people coming into town all the time. So there's so many other benefits besides just the penalty, the revenue, those kind of things. But I think a lot would happen with that. And that's why, man, it's going to be the next couple of seasons going to be really exciting to see how this plays out. So, I mean, I think at this point, the door is open. FSU knows the numbers now. The door is open to the Big Ten. I think we're going to have to start with them. The SEC, I think their deal's not up until, 2034, 2033?
Correct.
So it's a little bit different animal, and I think they've made it a little bit more clear that they're not really anxious to go after Florida State and Clemson. I think the Big Ten is going to be the one that's going to start this thing moving. At some point, they're going to come up with a date and a number that's going to work for Florida State, and that's going to get out there, and that's when the ball is going to go in the SEC's court, and we're going to see if they're willing to play ball or not.
Exactly. Is there a willingness from the SEC to play geographical defense? If there is, then this thing moves faster. Then resolution to this matter moves faster because the Big Ten looks at Florida State on the map of the United States and says, oh my God, we can tap into these resources. They'd even look at a school like, to me, Gene, speaking personally, Georgia Tech. You get the Atlanta market added to the footprint of the Big Ten. That is prime SEC country. That's where they play their championship game every single year. The Big Ten has to be salivating at these opportunities, whether it's in the medium term or the long term. But now the point is, Florida State is free. There was unanimous, the approval from Florida State's board. Everybody was in line. President McCullough said today, I got to give him total credit. Mm-hmm. He found a little dig on the way out. He says, thank you to Council Carolyn Egan and thank you to the board for looking at the viability of the ironclad nature of this contract of the grant of rights. The grant of rights is dead. Long and short of it, if you're still saying, well, wait a minute, is it exit fee plus? No, exit fee plus nothing. It's one price, and the maximum amount Florida State will pay for leaving the ACC is $165 million. That's the most they'll ever have to pay for leaving the ACC, and it decreases by $18 million every year until we get to 2030, and it's just $75 million. Mm-hmm. Fantastic negotiation by Florida State, Gene. I mean, they led the way in this negotiation. Not Clemson, not Florida State and Clemson. Florida State was the aggressor here.
And I'm glad you brought that up. I wanted to say something. I'll give a little bit of a tidbit here, and I'd also heard this from some other sources. I guess this is a few weeks ago that there was a settlement proposal on the board that Clemson was ready to go on board with. Not Florida State, not Peter Collins. No, they were playing significant hardball. And from what I was hearing back then and what the final terms ended up being, it's a pretty significant difference. You're talking tens of millions of dollars difference in Florida State's advantage in the settlement agreement. And that's because you have real leadership that knows how to negotiate at a high level, which is a complete 180 from what Florida State had 10 years ago when they got in this mess. So, I mean, really hats off to, Egan, to, McCullough, Mike Alford, obviously Peter Collins. I mean, a tremendous job negotiating this thing. And you mentioned those things when the negotiations start going on with the Big Ten and the SEC. I hope this leadership is still in place to be part of that, because I think it's going to be, especially if you got two sides negotiating against each other, wanting something. I mean, that's when you want to be in the middle of that, because that's going to go to your advantage. So I hope those guys are in place. I think they did a great job of this. I know there's some fans that will not be satisfied. They want it out for zero.
Yep.
It was never. I don't think that was ever a realistic possibility. But I think this is about, honestly, if you sat there, we all sat there, Tom, a year ago and said, what would be the best reasonable, scenario that this played out? I think this is it. I mean, I can't imagine this working out outside of in a year or two getting to a court and actually winning outright, which again just doesn't happen. I try to tell people it's so unrealistic. It's so rare in these complex litigation, especially when you got 4 different lawsuits going on. It was going to drag on. It was going to be a mess. You probably even then you're not going to win everything. So I mean, this was an unbelievable, probably best case scenario.
I was an absolutist about, take it the distance in court, go win your case and go be free of this. And I didn't think that a settlement could look like this. I really didn't think that a settlement could look like, you're paid more to leave sooner, and then when you leave, you're paying less than what the exit fee was yesterday. Because the exit fee was, and I'm not talking about the grant of rights on top of it, the exit fee alone was 3 times the ACC budget yesterday.
Wow.
Today, it's that same number at 165, but that includes the grant of rights, and you're being paid more to stack up the war chest for when you do leave. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's really well done. If you got thoughts, make sure to let us know in the comments here underneath the video. If you want to join Warchant Premier here on YouTube, that's very simple. If you're here on your laptop or your computer, there's a join button. We'll link it for you in the comments how to join us. This is a good day to use those new emojis that we roll out for Warchant Premier members. You can use those logos, mash those logos, and give us some feedback. We'll be happy to hear from you. Headed to warchant.com for all the coverage of Florida State's Board of Trustees hearing, the intel, lots of nuggets about the ins and outs of the deal. Our own Irish Rafael has that. And there's going to be a lot of discussion, Gene, coming up in the days after this about all kinds of things related to Florida State's future. So I appreciate your time as always, good sir.
Yep, and I guess we'll have some JCS. I mean, headlines were today. I'll have JCS tomorrow, and I'm sure this will be a topic of conversation. Did you get Andy Staples? Isn't he coming on?
Andy Staples, yes. So that has appeared already on the channel, and it'll be in its own capsule a little bit later today, Tuesday, March the 4th.
Awesome.
But a nice discussion between Jeff and Andy where they talk terms, and Andy relates it to a score on a football game scoreboard of what Florida State did versus the ACC. You'll want to hear his thoughts. Because he picked a winner.
Does the term boat race come into that used?
There was a term like boat race that was used, and it'll be very interesting to see. So everybody hit the like button underneath the video. Subscribe to the channel. It's always free. Premiere is just if you want bells and whistles, and we'll be happy to have you. Thanks, Gene.